I thought I had it all figured out. I was supposed to be better than this. My dad always said I was too soft. Now, all I have are debts, regrets, and the haunting memory of the moment I failed. I had always been told I had potential, that I was made for something bigger. But when it came time to prove it, I couldn't. I remember the last game, my last shot. I missed it. It wasn't just a shot, it was my future. That one failure crushed everything I had worked for. The scholarship, the career, everything just slipped away in an instant. I can still hear my dad's voice, the disappointment in his words echoing every time I think about it. "You should have done better," he would say. And here I am, sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by unopened bills and photographs of better days. Days when I thought I had a shot at something more. I tried to move on. I tried to forget. But every step I took, it felt like I was sinking deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. So when the job at the Adidas warehouse came up, I grabbed it. It wasn't much, but it was a chance, a fresh start. Or at least, that's what I told myself. I didn't care about the night shifts. I didn't care about the long hours. I just needed something. A way to prove that I could still make something of myself, that I wasn't a failure. This was supposed to be the beginning of something better. My last shot at redemption. Then came the text, "Remember the rules. Don't break them." I didn't know what to make of it, but something about the message felt real. It wasn't just some prank. I couldn't shake the feeling that this job wasn't going to be as easy as I thought. The warehouse was massive, stretching out endlessly, the shadows cast long by the dull glow of the overhead lights. The place had a certain quiet to it, a silence that felt almost unnatural. I wasn't used to it, not after being around people all the time. But this was different. I was alone, and the hum of the lights was the only sound, but it wasn't comforting. It felt like the lights were watching me. The warehouse had this cold, industrial feel to it, the smell of dust and old cardboard filling the air. I tried to push the unease to the back of my mind. It was just a warehouse, after all. Nothing special. But something about it felt off. Maybe it was just the isolation of the night shift. Maybe I was just tired. But as I walked deeper into the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Laura Reyes, the night supervisor, handed me a clipboard. She didn't say much, just a quick nod and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Here are the rules," she said. "Follow them, and you'll be fine." She handed me a list with a series of strange rules typed on it. I glanced at the first one: if you hear footsteps on the second floor, ignore them. The floor's been sealed off for years. I laughed it off. What kind of rule was that? It had to be a joke. But Laura's eyes weren't joking. There was something about her expression that made me pause. She wasn't smiling anymore. "Just follow the rules," she said again, her voice flat. There was tension in her words, but I brushed it aside. I had a job to do. As I read through the rest of the rules, they seemed odd, but nothing too crazy. I thought it was just warehouse protocol, like safety measures or whatever. Always check the shoes on aisle 17. If the laces are tied, untie them. Do not leave them tied. Another strange one, but still, I wasn't worried. "Don't break the rules," she said. I figured it was just a quirky routine. I spent the next few hours getting into the rhythm of the job, stacking boxes, organizing shelves. It wasn't hard work, just repetitive. But the longer I worked, the more the unease crept in. The warehouse felt like a different world at night, empty, quiet, and endless. Every time I turned a corner, I heard something. At first, it was faint, like whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination. But then, I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was a sound, like footsteps. They were far off, like they were coming from above. But I knew I was the only one in the building. The lights flickered, almost imperceptibly, but enough for me to notice. I stopped for a second, trying to shake off the feeling. Maybe I was just tired. The air in here was thick, stuffy, and I couldn't help but notice how cold it felt. A coldness that wasn't just physical. It felt deeper, like something was in the air, something that made me feel watched. But I kept working. I had to. Then I reached aisle 17. I stopped dead in my tracks. The shoes were lined up neatly, just like the rest of the aisles. But some of the shoes had their laces tied. I knew I hadn't touched them. The last time I was in this aisle, they were untied. Now, someone, or something, had tied them in perfect knots. I looked around. No one was there. It didn't make sense. I had to follow the rules. I bent down, my hands shaking slightly, and untied the shoes. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was stupid, I knew, but the silence was too thick, too heavy. It wasn't just the quiet of the night shift anymore. The air felt colder as I stood up, glancing around the empty aisle. I couldn't tell if it was just the warehouse or if I was really starting to lose it. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Maybe I was overthinking it. I shook my head. It didn't matter. I had to keep going. But every step I took, I felt the weight of the silence pressing in on me. I kept thinking about the rules. The warehouse grew quieter, but somehow the silence felt heavier now. Every step I took echoed through the empty aisles, the sound bouncing off the high walls, making me feel smaller. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, the noises I couldn't explain started up again. The creaking floors beneath my feet, the faint whispers that I couldn't pin down, and that soft tapping sound that was getting louder as if someone, or something, was walking just out of sight. I glanced around, unease crawling up my spine. I knew I had to stick to the rules. I kept thinking about Rule 3, if you see a mannequin with its arms raised, notify Laura immediately. Do not approach it. I scoffed to myself. It was ridiculous. A mannequin? Arms raised? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. But I was starting to get the feeling that this place was far stranger than I had originally thought. Just then, I caught a glimpse of something ahead of me. My eyes narrowed, and my stomach twisted into knots. At the end of the aisle stood a mannequin. Its arms were raised, almost like it was holding something or celebrating an invisible victory. But what struck me wasn't just the unnatural pose, it was the way it stared. As if it was looking directly at me. I froze, my heart suddenly beating in my chest as the memory of Rule 3 rushed back to me. I should have turned around. I should have walked the other way. But I couldn't. Something held me there, staring at the mannequin. I tried to step back, but I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Was it moving? No. No way. It was just my imagination. But it felt like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I kept my eyes locked on the mannequin, trying to tell myself it was just part of the display. Nothing to worry about. But the further I walked down the aisle, the more the air felt thick, suffocating almost. The sound of my footsteps became louder, as if they were the only thing cutting through the silence. The whispers were back. Closer this time. I could almost make out the words. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that I needed to focus on the job. Just get through the night. Just keep going. But every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a movement I couldn't explain. I checked the clock. It was 11:05 p.m. 5 more minutes until the next rule kicked in. I looked at the clipboard again. Rule 4, when the lights flicker at 11:11 p.m., stand still until they stop. It sounded absurd. But I had already seen enough strange things tonight to know that maybe, just maybe, these rules meant something. And then, it happened. At exactly 11:11 p.m., the lights flickered. I froze, following the rule. The air seemed to get colder, like a draft had swept through the building. My skin tingled, my heart raced, and the whispers grew louder. It felt like they were surrounding me, closing in on me from every direction. I couldn't tell if the sound was in my head or if it was real. But I could feel it, something was out there. Then, I turned around. The mannequin from earlier. It was closer now. Its arms still raised, its face still frozen in that unsettling pose. I stepped back, my eyes glued to the mannequin. My mind was racing. Was this really happening? Was I losing my grip on reality? I looked around again, trying to spot anything else that might explain the growing tension. But then, I saw it. Something was moving in the corner of my eye. A shadow that didn't belong, slipping just outside the light. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I started to question myself. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was just tired from the long hours. But no. Something was wrong. Something was definitely wrong here. I stepped closer to the shelf, trying to focus on the task at hand. There was a section filled with shoes, display shoes, neatly lined up, each pair shining under the cold fluorescent lights. I reached out to adjust one, and that's when it happened. The shoes, they moved. Not just shifted, like you'd expect from an unsettled display, but they actually floated. The laces untied themselves, twisting and tangling in midair as if an invisible hand was pulling at them. I stepped back in shock. I swear I'm losing my mind, I thought. But what if I wasn't? What if this was real? I had to make a decision. Should I leave? Could I? I had to get out, but I couldn't just run. Not like this. I had no answers. I couldn't let this place win. Not after everything. I had to see this through. What if I left and never got another chance? What if it was already too late? I couldn't stay in the aisle any longer. I had to find someone. I needed answers, even if I didn't want to hear them. I found Laura in the break room, sitting by herself, sipping from a coffee cup. She didn't look surprised when I walked in. "Laura," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something wrong with this place." I saw the mannequin and the shoes. She raised a hand, cutting me off before I could say more. "You don't get it, do you?" I shook my head, confused. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Her eyes softened for a moment, but only for a second. Then, she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not a joke. It's been happening for years. They're watching, Daniel. And if you break the rules, it'll come for you." I didn't understand. "Who's watching? What do you mean? What is this place?" Laura hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. Then, she leaned back, looking at me with an unreadable expression. "This warehouse. It has a history. A dark one. Accidents, workers who vanished, things that can't be explained." She paused. "Some say it's cursed. The shoes, the mannequins, they're connected to something much older. Something that won't leave." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But then I remembered the rules. And what had happened tonight. The mannequin. The shoes. The whispers. I swallowed. "What do you mean by it?" Laura's face darkened. "You don't want to know, Daniel. But if you stay here, you'll have to follow the rules. Because once you break them, you won't be able to undo what's been done." I couldn't stop thinking about what Laura had said. A curse? Spirits? It didn't make sense. But everything I'd seen tonight, the mannequin, the shoes, the strange rules, told me otherwise. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I walked into the warehouse, the cold air biting at my skin. The place looked normal, but it felt wrong. I dug through the office archives when no one was around, hoping to find something that would explain it all. That's when I found it. An old newspaper clipping. It was yellowed with age, the edges torn and ragged. The headline read, "Warehouse Tragedy, Shipment of Shoes Triggers Mysterious Deaths." The article described a tragic accident that occurred years ago. A shipment of shoes, just like the ones I had seen, was involved in a deadly crash. Workers died. The article mentioned whispers of a curse tied to the shoes, and how the mannequin seemed to come alive after the accident. Laura had been right. The rules weren't just quirky. They were the only thing keeping the spirits at bay. I looked at the clipboard again. Rule 6, never touch the shoes on display. Once you wear them, you become one of them. I didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed to one truth. The curse wasn't just a story. It was real. The tension was unbearable. The warehouse felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me with every step I took. The lights above me flickered again, this time much more violently. The shadows around me stretched and twisted in ways that defied logic, moving independently, like they had a mind of their own. My heart was hammering in my chest. I could feel something watching me, something waiting. I could barely focus on the task at hand. I tried to follow the rules, but the pressure was too much. I needed to keep it together. I needed to keep going. But as I moved past aisle 17, I saw the display shoes again. This time, they weren't just sitting there. They twitched. The laces moved like they had a life of their own, slowly tangling themselves up and untying all at once. I stepped back, trying to stay calm. But something inside me was drawing me toward them. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't resist. It was like they were calling to me, like they wanted me to touch them. But I knew what I was doing. I knew the risk. I knew the rules. But I didn't care anymore. Then, I heard it. A voice. It came from the darkness. "Daniel." I froze. I almost answered. It was so clear. It felt like it was right there in my ear. But I remembered the rule. Don't answer voices from the darkness. I swallowed hard, shaking my head. I wasn't going to fall for it. I wasn't going to be one of them. Not yet. The warehouse seemed to shudder beneath me. The lights flickered again, then went out entirely. For a split second, there was nothing but darkness. My pulse raced. I tried to find my bearings, but the world felt wrong. Every breath felt heavier, like the air itself was thickening around me. The hairs on my neck stood up. I had to get out. I had to get out now. But the shoes. They were right there, waiting. I reached out, my hands trembling. I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop myself. My fingers brushed against the display shoes, and that's when everything went to hell. The warehouse shook violently. The ground beneath me seemed to tremble with an intensity one couldn't explain. I looked around, but everything was a blur. Shadows filled the space, moving as if alive. I could hear something in the distance, a low, guttural growl. And then, it happened. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't human. It was something else, spectral, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It floated in front of me, eyes locked on mine, radiating anger, pure and simple. It reached for me, its form flickering like a flame. I took a step back, but my feet wouldn't move fast enough. I had already made the mistake. The curse had me. I fought to push the shoes back, to stop myself from completing whatever I had started. But it was too late. The air around me thickened, pressing in, suffocating me. I had become part of it. The rules had protected me before, but now? Now, they were nothing. Too late. I struggled. I fought to place the shoes back, to reverse what I had done. But as my hand reached for them, the warehouse went completely dark. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even hear anything. There was just the oppressive weight of silence. And then, I heard it. A growl. Deep. Animal-like. It came from the shadows. It was coming for me. If you hear the rules, you're already too late, I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't know who I was saying it for anymore. Myself? Or someone else, someone who might be reading this later? I don't think it matters. And if you're reading this, I don't think you'll make it out either. The whisper returned, echoing through the warehouse. The shoes are looking for a new host. What would you have done? Would you have followed the rules? Or would you have broken them? What happens next? Comment your thoughts in the comments section. Would you risk it, or would you have run?